Okay, so thank you. As Irene said, I've worked with the acanthamoeba for 18 years, but usually they only allow me to stay in the lab with the acanthamoeba. So I've never ever sort of come across any acanthamoeba patients before. So this is a good thing for me. So I'm just going to start off by just telling you a little bit about myself and where I discovered acanthamoeba and why I ended up getting involved with acanthamoeba. So way back in 1997, I started off as a pharmacologist. Never ever wanted to do any microbiology whatsoever, but then I decided that I sort of quite liked the pharmacology associated with killing things. So I originally then started off working with malaria, and because I enjoyed malaria, I went off to the School of Tropical Medicine and did an MSc that's probably got one of the world's longest names in applied parasitology and medical entomology. And this, in a meeting, we had a visiting speaker from the London School of Tropical Medicine, was when I first heard somebody mention the word acanthamoeba keratitis. So a gentleman called David Waters came to give us a lecture and talked about the work of Simon Kilverton. So after that, I decided I wanted to do a PhD. So I then went off to work for Simon Kilverton, working with acanthamoeba. So this was back in 2001, I started working with Simon Kilverton, and I stayed at the University of Leicester to do my PhD. I did my PhD on the subject of chemotherapy and disinfection of acanthamoeba. I then stayed on, managed to drag it out over 11 years, so I stayed there as an honorary lecturer then. I've never managed to escape university. It's like I went to university in 97, and in 2019 I'm still at university. So I went to Wolverhampton about 4.5 years ago. I got very tired of spending 5 hours a day on a train commuting to Leicester. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm from the West Midlands anyway. So we set up the lab probably around 3 years ago, and there I now work with acanthamoeba and also a senior lecturer in biomedical science. Okay, so this is where I work. So people don't expect Wolverhampton to be very good. I did this joke at a surgeons meeting about 2 years ago, and one of the surgeons was from Wolverhampton, but she said I agree. So I'm not going to say anything bad about the city today.
I'm from Wolverhampton.
Who are you? Okay, I've got no bad jokes about Wolverhampton as a place. I've got a joke about the football club there. Okay, so this is where my lab's located. So I live on the 4th floor. So we recently invested a large amount of money in improving the laboratory facilities, and this is where I've set my lab up. This is where I do all of my research. Okay, so I'm located on the 4th floor of the building, and I've got quite a large team now. So within this lab, we've got all the facilities we need in order to work with acanthamoeba. So I set the lab up about 3 years ago after previously working in the lab in Leicester. I've now got better facilities than I had when I was working in Leicester. And as I'll explain, a lot of the funding for the laboratory doesn't come from the usual sources of income. We generally do a lot of testing for the contact lens industry. And most of our funding does come from the contact lens industry. Okay, so this is my team here. So I have a team of 5 PhD students, including Noor. She's a medical doctor that now wants to do a PhD. And then, so Anas, Adam, Sam, Getcha, Nora, my PhD students, and then I've got a postdoc who's called Enas. Okay, so not everything is great about Wolverhampton. This is my joke about Wolverhampton. If you can spot this sort of structure just over here, this one just here, can anyone tell what this is?
Molyneux?
It is the Molyneux.
Yeah.
Okay, unfortunately I support their arch enemies, West Bromwich Albion. It's not only very painful to have to look out the window to see the Molyneux every time I look out the window, but it's quite painful the fact that they're in the Premier League and we're still in the Championship. Okay, so that's the Molyneux. Okay, so it's difficult for me to sort of say what I think I actually am. So I'm sort of a microbiologist, parasitologist, pharmacologist, but really I specialise in high throughput drug screening, and it's mainly ocular pathogens. So I do lots of acanthamoeba drug sensitivity testing. As I said, I work a lot with the contact lens industry, so doing a lot of bacterial and fungal testing, viral testing as well, depending on the market. I do turn my hand to other types of disinfection, so we do work with drinking water disinfection. So we worked on a European Union funded sodium water project using solar energy to sterilise water. I also do wastewater disinfection, but the main thrust of what I do is acanthamoeba. But I do also work with some other nasty parasites as well. So I do also work with this horrible sort of lesion that you can see on this gentleman's face here. This is leishmania. The reason I'm interested in leishmania is because leishmania is a parasite of a macrophage, whereas acanthamoeba is essentially a free-living macrophage that sort of causes infection. So they're very, very similar. Okay, we also do work with diabetic foot ulcer, and a lot of that is because we develop disinfectants. Keratitis is harder to get funding for, so we develop some of the disinfectants for the diabetic foot ulcer market because it's easier for us to get funding by that route. But by doing that, we can sort of piggyback onto that in order to develop things, improve contact lens disinfectants as well. Okay, so what I like to do is whenever I read the newspapers, I find it quite painful at times to read some of the things that are said about acanthamoeba. So I'm just going to show you some of the things, and I think this goes back to what Irene said, that acanthamoeba needs to raise its profile so people understand about the disease a lot more, so it becomes more well known. Okay, so I'm going to do the brief introduction, facts and fiction for the media, and then obviously I'm going to tell you about my research. So I pretty much do everything when it comes to the research with acanthamoeba. So we look at preventing the infection, improving the diagnosis, improving the treatment, and then we do some other aspects where we investigate the biology of the acanthamoeba as well. Okay, so I'm sure you probably all know what acanthamoeba infection is, but nevertheless I thought I would do a very brief introduction. Okay, so as you all know, it's an infection of the cornea. The acanthamoeba enters through the epithelium. That doesn't seem to turn it off.
No, I don't know.
So
I think keep going Wayne and then.
yeah, okay. Okay, so as we know, it's very rare. So probably anywhere between 100 to 200 cases per year in the UK. Unfortunately, there is no licensed treatments, as you're all aware. So generally, most patients will receive PHAB. And it probably is one of the most difficult eye infections to manage. It's exquisitely painful, and ultimately it's going to lead to sort of damage to the cornea, which leads to reduction in vision, and in some cases can also lead to blindness. Okay, so the acanthamoeba is quite unusual, really, because as an organism, it's probably the most successful organism on the planet. Okay, it's absolutely everywhere. Okay, but under certain circumstances, the acanthamoeba can attach onto your eye. And on the surface of the acanthamoeba is a mannose receptor. Okay, mannose is a sugar, and it binds to these mannose glycoproteins, these mannose sugar residues that are located on the surface of the corneal epithelium. When it latches onto those, it causes the acanthamoeba to release proteases. Okay, so the acanthamoeba will release these enzymes, which will then start to digest the surface of the eye in order for the acanthamoeba to then gain entry. And when it's inside the eye, so the blue bit that you can see on the picture just here, that's the corneal stroma. That's made up of collagen, which to acanthamoeba, that's food, so it will use its enzymes to digest the collagen that makes up the inside of the cornea, and that will then lead to the damage. Okay, the presence of the acanthamoeba in the cornea will cause the infiltration or the movement of macrophages and neutrophils into the eye, and that's obviously what you see when you start to get the reduction in vision. Our immune cells come towards the acanthamoeba in order to try and meet the challenge of the infection, and these in themselves will also cause lots of damage to the eye. And in the case of acanthamoeba, probably more of the damage is attributed to the neutrophil rather than the acanthamoeba, so one of the cells of our immune system. Okay, so when it comes to acanthamoeba, so as we know, it's a free-living amoeba, it sort of pretty much lives everywhere. The word acantha means thorny, so it's called the thorny amoeba, so these projections that you can see on the surface. It's a eukaryote, so it means it's like us, rather than like a bacterium, and it's relatively large. So if you imagine its size there, 30 to 45 micrometers, that means it's 30 to 40 times bigger than your average bacterium. So it's very, very large in size. And it exists as a trophozoite, which is the motile and the feeding stage, which you can see in this electron micrograph here. And it's motile because it has these false feet or pseudopodia that it can push out and flow into in order to move. Okay, so also this is the problem with acanthamoeba is if it encounters conditions that are unfavourable, what it will do is it will transform into a cyst. And it's this cyst that's extremely resistant to chemical disinfection and extremely resistant to treatment. Okay, so I don't know if my video will actually play, but I don't know if anyone's ever seen a acanthamoeba moving. This is an acanthamoeba. So it's at the moment it doesn't like my microscope light, so it's trying to get away from the light on the microscope. So it's trying to move left and right and trying to get away from the light so it's really warm. Okay, so that's how it moves. That movement, you can see that's cyclinated pseudopodia, and usually it will move towards the food source and then leave the food source. Okay, so it can move very, very quickly.
So I just swore at it, sorry. I got really angry when I saw that.
Okay, so I always say this to my students, so where in the world does this very dangerous creature live? And as you all know, it lives in all of our houses, and I said it probably is one of the most successful organisms on the planet. So it lives, generally it's a soil amoeba, so it lives in all of your gardens and it feeds on bacteria in the soil. If your shower head looks like this one that's just here, that's bacteria buildup. Acanthamoeba-like bacteria. Acanthamoeba naturally live in water. Okay, so if your shower head looks like that, that potentially can increase the amount of acanthamoeba that are in the area surrounding the shower head. Okay, water tanks that you may have in your loft as well will encourage the proliferation of bacterial biofilm, which will encourage the proliferation of acanthamoeba. Okay, so it is everywhere, but fortunately infection is relatively rare. Okay, so as I said, acanthamoeba in the media, so this is what I was saying before, some facts or fiction. Okay, so this was taken from the Daily Mail. Okay, and so the fact, or the statement here is Mrs. X was forced to use pool cleaner eye drops to kill the infection every couple of hours for several months. So the newspapers don't really understand the infection, they like to be very, very sensational. But it is actually a fact. PHMB is marked as Bacillus, which is actually a swimming pool disinfectant. So this one, in this case, is actually true. Then we have one from the Nottingham Tab. And here, the statement that she made is, Hall's water gave me the parasite. Okay, so she was blaming, in the university newspaper, she was blaming the university for giving her the infection. And again, it would have been present in the Hall's tap water, so again, this one is a fact. And also about the corneal scrape, again, most patients that are diagnosed with acanthamoeba keratitis will be diagnosed after having a corneal scrape. Okay, so another one here. This is one of the ones that always pains me from the Daily Mirror. The bacteria, which affects 1 in 5,000 contact lens wearers, is commonly found in tap water. Okay, it's fiction. It is not a bacterium. It's a eukaryotic microorganism. A few weeks later, they got more confused. What's it here? So a mother has been told of her horror after being blinded by a parasitic worm. So the same editor now thinks it's a parasitic worm that causes acanthamoeba. So again, this one's fiction. It's definitely an amoeba. And then to my favourite. This is definitely somebody, you would expect a little bit more maybe of the Daily Telegraph. If untreated, the parasite causes sight problems and paralysis or even death as it eats its way through the eye and into the spinal cord. Okay, so unfortunately, the junior person that's done this has gone onto Wikipedia and see that acanthamoeba does cause a brain infection, but in severely immunocompromised people. So they've got very, very confused, put 2 and 2 together and got about 25. So obviously this doesn't happen. Okay, so when it comes to preventing acanthamoeba keratitis, so as I said, I've worked with acanthamoeba for the last 18 years, and I've worked for the contact lens industry, so companies like Cooper Vision, Bausch & Lomb, Johnson & Johnson, and I do their research and development for them. So most of them can do their bacterial and fungal testing, but they don't do the specialist acanthamoeba testing, so I tend to do that sort of thing for them. So new product development, competitive testing and things like that. So some of these products you may be familiar with here, if any of you still wear contact lenses. So these are the the solutions that you use to clean your lenses. So we provide a service testing according to a variety of different ISO standards in order to report the results. And they use this to support sort of FDA licensing, CE marking and things like that in order to get their products into specific markets. But the reason I do it is because it funds the research. It funds all of the acanthamoeba research that we do in the laboratory. Okay, so in terms of preventing, I'm one of the nominated experts at the British Standards Institute. So what this means is, generally it means that we go to different places and it's usually people from all of the other different standards committees. So companies like Alcon, Bausch & Lomb and so on and so forth, but then British standards, American standards, Japanese standards and Australian standards. And then we argue about how to test contact lens solutions to see if they're any good at killing acanthamoeba. That tends to be the general theme of it. And then we have to get together, we do something called a ring test where all of the labs simultaneously have to test the solutions using this particular method in order to try and improve the requirements in order to get a solution to market. At the moment, there isn't an international standard that tells you that your acanthamoeba your solution should kill acanthamoeba. Okay, so you have to do it for licensing, but there isn't an international standard at the moment that you have to meet to get your product to market. Okay, so hopefully the first part of that should be out within the next 12 to 18 months if we can get it through. Okay, so when it comes to diagnosing AK, there's a major problem with it. So we start off obviously with a corneal scrape under local anaesthetic, and then the corneal scrape is then placed onto a non-nutrient agar plate, and the non-nutrient agar plate has been seeded with E. coli. Okay, so remember I said acanthamoeba lives in the soil. Okay, so we're giving it some of the other food that it likes. Okay, so you put the corneal scrape onto the agar, the acanthamoeba will hatch out and it will start to move across the agar. And these things that you can sort of see just here, these are the tracks, and you can actually see the acanthamoeba moving, or you can at least see the tracks where they've moved across the surface of the agar. Okay, so this afternoon I've been at the Halo, which is the new sort of testing laboratories that are located just opposite King's Cross Station. So I've been talking to them about how they do their diagnosis, because one of the real problems with this is the sensitivity rate is very low. Okay, it often is probably only positive in 50% of patients that actually have the infection. Okay, and there's certainly possible reasons why this may be the case. There is probably an urgent need for better treatments, but there is things I think we can look at with the current diagnosis to see if that will improve sensitivity rates. Okay, so I've been doing a project recently with Scott, who hasn't come yet, at Moorfields Eye Hospital. So what we've been looking at is some of the treatments that a patient may be exposed to prior to their acanthamoeba diagnosis. So they may be given antibiotics, antivirals, and also with the corneal scrape, they may also, obviously they will be anaesthetised in order for the scrape to occur. Okay, so the question that we're asking is, do antibiotics affect viability? So remember, antibiotics target bacteria. This is a eukaryotic organism. It shouldn't affect them. Okay, so I won't go through the results in detail. I'll just go through the bullet points that are at the bottom. Okay, so antibiotics and antivirals are often given. Okay, so one of the drops that patients are often given prior to their diagnosis, because you're more likely to have bacterial infection, they'll give you something like levofloxacin. But the problem is, in most cases, levofloxacin is preserved with benzalkonium chloride. Okay, and levofloxacin cannot kill acanthamoeba, but benzalkonium chloride can. So if you've been on eye drops that have been preserved with benzalkonium chloride, when the corneal scrapes are performed, many of the amoeba in the scrape will be dead. And this is possibly one of the reasons that we're thinking that this could be one of the reasons why the sensitivity rate is actually so low. And we've just literally written this up. We submitted it about 4 weeks ago to one of the ARVO journals. So hopefully the study that I'm going to talk about on quite a few slides at the moment should be published in the next possibly the next month to 2 months time. Okay, so the problem is, in levofloxacin, the benzalkonium chloride is there at 50 micrograms per mil, but it's toxic to the amoeba at around 2 micrograms per mil. So even factoring in it being diluted down in your tears and penetrated into your eye, it's still at a concentration far above what's toxic to the amoeba. and so it's potentially causing problems when it comes to diagnosis. So I have some pretty pictures for you which we've just taken for the study. So this is a healthy cyst, so we've chopped this through the middle. So what you can see is the very, very thick cellulose wall, so this is what protects the acanthamoeba. And inside, what you can see here is the trophozoite. Okay, so this is the thick cyst wall that you can see here, and this is the encysted trophozoite. So this is its nucleus and nucleolus that you can see in the middle of the cell. When it was exposed to concentrations of benzalkonium chloride that are present in many eye drops, you can see that they don't look the same anymore. You can no longer see the nucleus and the nucleolus. The trophozoite is membrane, the outer surface of the amoeba has been damaged, and it's started to shrink away from the wall. It's almost certainly now not viable. Okay, so this again could be something that could be. And I think for going forward, sort of with the clinicians, possibly the choice of antibiotics with patients may need to be thought about, because the choice of antibiotics in acanthamoeba patients may ultimately affect the diagnosis. Okay, so we also then looked at anaesthetics and looked to see whether anaesthetics had any effect on viability. Okay, so obviously the cornea needs to be anaesthetised for the scrape to be performed. So what we did was we looked at some of the commonly used anaesthetics, so proximethicane, tetracaine, oxybuprocaine, and lidocaine. Okay, in particular, tetracaine was incredibly toxic to the acanthamoeba. Okay, so what we found was, if we looked at the concentration at which tetracaine was toxic and looked at the concentration at which tetracaine is present in the eye drops that are placed on the patient's eye, okay, so it's placed onto the eye at 10,000 micrograms per mil, but it's actually toxic at around 20 micrograms per mil. Okay, so even if you dilute the tetracaine eye drops over 500 times, it's still toxic to the amoeba. And this is one of the things that we believe is going to negatively impact upon the corneal scrape. So if you anaesthetise, scrape, the tetracaines kill the acanthamoeba, so the scrape is unlikely to come back positive. We're not saying definitely, but our evidence is suggesting that this is possibly the case. So again, possibly the choice of anaesthetic may affect whether the culture comes back positive or not. So again, what we've got here, this is a healthy cyst exposed to tetracaine, and you can see there's a dramatic difference. So the membrane of the trophozoite that's on the inside of the cyst has been damaged, and all those little spherical objects you can see inside, where the membrane has been damaged, and then it's sort of coalesced into form these little vesicles on the inside of the cell. Okay, so again, nucleus, nucleolus, membrane has all been damaged, and so the acanthamoeba is now no longer viable. Remember, this is the cyst stage, not the trophozoite stage. This is the stage that's actually hard to kill. The trophozoite is even easier to kill. So you can see the effects that these, obviously you can't do a corneal scrape without an anaesthetic, but in many cases, if the anaesthetic is taking out the organism, maybe culture is a problem, and maybe we have to think a little bit different about how we approach it. Okay, so one of the things that we've been looking at is a rapid diagnostic test. Okay, so we've currently there is no commercially available monoclonal antibody, so an antibody that targets acanthamoeba. So we had funding from the Institute of Biomedical Science, and we've made 3 monoclonal antibodies that will bind to every species of acanthamoeba we've thrown at them. So what we're currently doing now is taking these and trying to make them into a rapid diagnostic test. And the approach that we've decided to go for is the lateral flow system. So essentially a pregnancy test. Okay, so we're just going to take the acanthamoeba antibodies, we're going to use a spray jet or an air jet dispenser to spray the antibodies onto the cellulose membrane, and then we can insert them into these cassettes. And then we're going to sort of evaluate this. So we've got another follow-up funding sort of to IBMS, so hopefully we should find out in August whether we've got the funding to develop this further. Okay, so when it comes to treating acanthamoeba keratitis, I'm sure you all know, so I won't go through this, so you all know the problems associated with it and the fallbacks of it. So it's incredibly difficult to manage, and so there is an urgent need to find new treatments. Okay, so one of the things that we've been doing is looking at compounds that currently are out there. Okay, so PHMB really is one of the best things that is still sort of out there. We've looked at some other biguanides as well, so PHMB is a biguanide polymer. We've also looked at chlorhexidine, octenidine and alexidine, which all contain the same guanidine group within it. We also looked at another disinfectant called povidone-iodine, and what we found was that all of the biguanides, certainly in vitro, are active against acanthamoeba. Whether that then translates to in vivo activity, but in vitro, inside in a laboratory setting, they are very, very active. Whether these water-soluble drugs then get into the cornea to target the amoeba is a different thing. Okay, so PVPI, which is povidone-iodine, that thing you see on medical programs on TV, the orange-coloured disinfectants they wipe onto the surface of the skin, that's very, very active also against acanthamoeba. There are other drugs which are much rarer to get hold of. Octenidine and alexidine are potentially more active than acanthamoeba. However, more activity might translate to increased toxicity, but they are potentially other drugs that could be used if PHMB is not working. Okay, so just to show you again some pictures, so there's our healthy cyst, and then if we show you our PHMB exposed cyst, so the PHMB is a detergent, it's just going to smash the trapezoid cell membrane, that's leaked, and so you can see the trapezoid's really shrunk now inside the cyst. Contrast that with povidone-iodine, very, very similar effect. It's damaged the trapezoid that's on the inside of the cyst, and it's shrunk massively from the inside wall. Okay, so both of those would now not be viable. Okay, so one of the interesting things that we looked at also was some of the diamidines that patients are often given. So patients are often given hexamidine or propamidine in the form of Broline. And according to the results that we saw here, Broline is active around 15.6 micrograms per mil. However, Broline is also preserved with benzalkonium chloride. Okay, so we obtained some pure propamidine and compared and made it up to the same concentration as what's in Broline, tested it and found that it doesn't actually do anything. Okay, so one of the drugs that's been used for many, many years, it does work, but it's not the propamidine that does it. It's actually the preservative that's contained within the product that actually does all the activity. So propamidine on its own does very, very little. However, hexamidine, which is also called disamidine, is a very structurally very, very similar sort of drug. That does appear to have activity, and that one isn't preserved with benzalkonium chloride. Okay, there are a variety of other drugs out there. So certainly other drugs that we've tested, so things like nortepacine, natamycin, voriconazole, posaconazole, do all have potential activity against acanthamoeba. And certainly some things like voriconazole have the option of being used orally as well as instead of as topical drops. Okay. Right, so when it comes to developing novel therapies, so we work developing nanoparticles. I can't say exactly what it is that we do here because it's funded by Innovate UK. So we had to do it for diabetic foot ulcer because when we first applied for the money for keratitis, they said no. So we removed the words keratitis and replaced it with diabetic foot ulcer. Disinfectants, it's the same organisms, so it doesn't really matter the way you test them, it's the same, they're just disinfectants. So we originally got £123,000 from them, so we're now following this up with another grant. But we make these lipid nanoparticles, and the theory is to take these water-soluble drugs like chlorhexidine and deliver them deeper into the cornea. And the results are actually quite dramatic. Okay, so chlorhexidine on its own against the cyst, we're seeing around 31.3 micrograms per mil is what's called its minimum cysticidal concentration. If we incorporate it into the nanoparticle, it increases its activity by a factor of 10. Okay, so we're looking at something that's quite important here. As part of this grant, we've been incorporating antibiotics as well because our focus mainly for the purpose of the grant is bacteria. But again, we've also managed to piggyback some acanthamoeba drugs onto the project as well. But again, this is looking very, very good in terms of activity. Okay, we have a project funded by Cougar Vision. It's all confidential because they make us sign a confidentiality agreement. But basically what we're doing is we're taking PHMB, which nobody ever envisaged being a treatment for acanthamoeba infection. It was always going to be a surgical scrub or a hot tub disinfectant. Okay, so nobody really thought about it when it was being developed. So this project started in January 2019, and we're looking at synthesising a variety of different compounds with the guanidino group, with the biguano grouping, which are these NHs that you can sort of see here, to see if we can find something that has better activity. We're also looking at PHMB as a polymer, so where you can see this N down in the bottom right-hand corner, that means it's made of several of those. So PHMB can be 2 of those, 3 of those, 4 of those, 5 of those, all linked together like Lego bricks. We don't actually know which length it has the optimum activity, so that's one of the other things that we're going to look at in order to improve its efficacy. Okay, so when it comes to investigating acanthamoeba, okay, so you've all seen the sort of the stromal ring that you can sort of see here, and this is caused by the acanthamoeba being there and then the immune cells being recruited towards the acanthamoeba. So one of the things that we're looking at is to sort of try and work out exactly what is causing the damage in the infection. So is it the acanthamoeba? Is it the macrophages? Is it the neutrophils? I'm going to be careful because some horrible pictures coming around in a second. I think I've got a warning on the next slide. So what we've been doing is developing an ex vivo model. Okay, so what this actually means is we go to our local slaughterhouse, where this is this very large industrial slaughterhouse that goes from pigs to sausages. So we go along to them. We learned all of the techniques initially at the Leicester Royal Infirmary, how to remove corneas from the eye. Then we learned at the Bristol Eye Bank how to culture the corneas. So what we do is we culture the corneas in the lab, just as you would for a corneal transplant, and we can keep them alive once we've taken them from the animals. So we take them from the animals immediately after they've been killed. Okay, so we're not killing the animals for our work. The animals are being used to make sausages. Okay, so we go there, collect them, and then we work with them in the laboratory. Okay, graphic images. Okay, so fortunately, I get my PhD students to do this chopping now. So what we've been doing is we go and take the pig's eyes. There we go. So we go down to the slaughterhouse. They have a certain type of gallows humour that people will go and collect them from. As a joke, sometimes what they'll do is they'll stick all the eyes into one of those vacuum packs that you get your pork chops in, and they'll bring them to me like this. And so I'll sort of say, here you go, and they put eyeballs and prices and that on them, but they have a very strange bunch of people, but they allow me to have as many eyes as I actually want. So what we then do is we sterilise them, because they've got to go into growth media in order to grow. So we sterilise them in iodine. Then the horrible bit, sorry. We then have to dissect them, or my PhD students have to dissect them. We're not as good as the surgeons that showed us how to do it at the Leicester Royal Infirmary. We tend to just pull everything apart. We're just trying to get the corneal tissue with a little bit of the sclera, a little bit of the white. But then what we do is we have set up a system that mimics blinking in the laboratory. Okay, so when we placed the order for this, the ordering lady looked at us very confused. This is an egg incubator. Okay, so one that you incubate chickens' eggs in. Okay, but it keeps it at a nice ambient temperature. It rocks backwards and forwards, and as you can see on this picture, the corneas sit there, and as it rocks, the liquid, which is the growth media, goes over the top of the cornea, so it bathes it in nutrients. Okay, we can keep the acanthamoeba, we can keep the tissue alive for 2-3 weeks, and we can then sort of section it up. So my PhD student that does all of this work, she's a histopathologist from a hospital in Amman in Jordan. So she does all the sectioning work. And so what we're doing is we're injecting acanthamoeba, we're injecting neutrophils and macrophages into the eye to see how the disease progresses, to see if we can get a better understanding of the pathology or the pathogenesis. Okay, one of the other things that we've been doing is with Moorfields Eye Hospital. Is certainly Moorfields, and Scott at Moorfields is really into his in vivo confocal microscopy. And one of the things that we want to do is to try and recreate some of the things that Scott sees here in the clinic at Moorfields. So Scott gets a lot of these sort of images, so what you can sort of see here, this is an acanthamoeba cyst that you can see here, so you can see a bright circle, and then there's a bit in the middle that's also bright that seems to have shrunken away from the edge, so you can see just here. And then the image on the right, they just seem to be bright, sort of, and it's just bright around the edge. Well, Scott knows they're acanthamoeba, but we don't know what they actually are. So what we're trying to work out is, are these dead cysts? Are these live cysts? are this intermediate cyst stage that we sometimes come across called a protocyst. And certainly if you look at the image on the left and the image in the middle, which is a dead cyst, you could sort of see how those two could be the same thing. Okay, so these two here, they sort of look like the same thing. So what we're trying to do is inject an ex vivo model with dead and live acanthamoeba, and then see if we can recreate the images on our confocal microscope to try and give Scott a key to help when he's looking down the microscope to know exactly what it is that he's looking at. Okay, so I realise I've been talking for quite a long time now, so I'll do the next bit very quickly. This is something that I'm very interested in at the moment, is we have a cyst and we have a trophozoite. We're trying to prove at the moment that there may be a third life cycle stage, which is we're going to call the protocyst. Okay, so it all came back from a paper that we published many years ago now, which was due to the product failure of this particular contact lens solution. This solution caused encystment, okay, but the encystment that it caused was not normal encystment. Okay, it formed these very, very immature looking cysts with a very, very thin cyst wall. It still is cellulose, or at least it's stained with calcifer white, but at the time we just thought they were immature cysts. We didn't really think anything. We didn't think anything of it. And so some electron micrographs as well. So they are cysts, but they don't have the thick cyst wall that you would usually expect to see with a cyst. Okay, so when we looked at it, when we were contracted to do the work for AMO, unfortunately that particular solution contained taurine. The only other thing that contains taurine is Red Bull. Okay, so we initially suspected, we asked them why they had put taurine in their solution, to which they said, we don't know. They thought the solution, when the company had been bought from the products, and the company had moved over from Allergan to AMO, nobody really seemed to know. Okay, so we suspected it was probably taurine, because if you give a company with taurine, they do insist. But it turned out it wasn't taurine ultimately. It turns out that it was a compound called propylene glycol. Okay. What you can see in this red line here is this proto-encystment, where it forms this very immature cyst very, very quickly within about 2 hours. If you contrast this with the blue line, which is a full encystment, where this occurs over 24 hours. So we're trying to argue if these two are not actually the same thing, they are actually different. Okay, so we've looked at them by autofluorescence and found that if you look at the cysts are the red circle that you can see here, and we compared that with the autofluorescence of the trophozoite, and then we looked at the autofluorescence of the protocyst and found that if it was just an immature version of the cyst, it would have the same autofluorescence signature, but it had a completely different autofluorescence signature. Okay, so we now think it probably is a slightly different life cycle stage, but I will go through these very, very quickly. We've been doing scanning, something called FTIR. So the top one in blue is acanthamoeba cyst wall. The bottom one is cellulose. And if I put the two of them on top of each other, you can see they are exactly the same thing. The cyst and cellulose are exactly the same thing. If we contrast that with the protocyst, so at the top here, we have the spectra of the cyst, and at the bottom we have the spectra of the protocyst. If you put them on top, they are completely different. Okay, so at the moment we're trying to work out what exactly the protocyst is actually made of. Okay, so if we make a protocyst, leave it for longer, it never turns into a cyst. We have to transform it back to a trophozoite before we can transform it back to a cyst or back to a protocyst. So it looks like it might be an alternative thing, it may be an alternative strategy for targeting in terms of treatment, and it may be an alternative strategy in trying to investigate the pathogenesis of the disease itself. Okay, so this is what we're sort of thinking at the moment. So I thought I might actually have a preliminary result, but they were doing the GCMS work yesterday, which is the chromatography. So we've had to smash it up, look at the different sugars that are there, look at something called linkage analysis. It didn't quite give us a categoric answer to what we were hoping to get, but we're still working on this sort of at the moment. Okay, so the last, I think, sort of slides, or the last slide, I think. So as I said before, acanthamoeba is essentially a free liquid macrophage. So one of the things that we've noticed is they both phagocytose in exactly the same way. They're both susceptible to mycobacterial infections. They're both susceptible to Legionella infections. Acanthamoeba is actually the natural host for Legionnaire's disease. So when we get Legionnaire's disease, it's just that our alveolar macrophages that live in our lungs are almost identical to acanthamoeba, so they can take the jump from acanthamoeba into our alveolar macrophages. Okay, so one of the things that we're looking at is certainly when you get the corneal stromal ring, the immune cells don't seem to get past the acanthamoeba, and we're sort of looking at the theory that maybe they are able to talk to each other because they look almost identical. So if you look, the top one is an acanthamoeba, the bottom one is a macrophage, so possibly they are very similar in many, many respects. So what we're doing is looking for phenotypic similarities, so we're looking for immune-based receptors, cytokine receptors, to see if any of them are present. People have done it with Naegleria and other amoeba and found them, but nobody seems to have done it with acanthamoeba. So again, it might give us some novel treatment strategies for this particular pathogen. Okay, so funny. So sorry for talking so long. So just to sort of say thank you to my my PhD students and also my sort of my postdoc, also my collaborators, also Cooper Vision, who sort of funds a lot of the projects in the lab and certainly fund one of my PhD students. Just to say thank you to Moorfields, in particular Scott, who we've been working with recently, and also my good friends and also mentor Simon Kilmington, who's worked with acanthamoeba probably for about the last 30 or 40 years. So thank you for listening, and obviously if you've got any questions, I'd be more than happy to have a go at answering them.
Great, thank you so much. That's amazing. We've probably got 5 minutes for questions, so we may have some online.
We've got a couple, but let's go with the room first.
In the room first.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just a quick question. So you're talking about the corneal straight as a way of, and it's got 50% accuracy.
Yes.
So I wondered, how do you actually find your own acanthamoeba?
So we generally all about
Sorry to interrupt. Would you mind repeating the question just so that
yeah, sure.
I just want to make sure that the people can hear.
Okay,
who are listening online.
so the question is, where do I get my acanthamoeba from? So,
And how do you know that they are acanthamoeba if it's only 50%?
okay, so I generally, receive some clinical strains, but the majority of the work that we do will be using strains from the American Type Culture Collection. So we'll buy strains that have been deposited, so strains that have come from patients and have been deposited with a strain depository. So we buy acanthamoeba castellanii, acanthamoeba polyphaga from these commercial operations that will sell particular strains to us.
I think you're also asking, like, if you scrape and you only find 50% of the time that you can grow acanthamoeba, how do you know that the rest of the people have it? Yeah? Like that other 50%, how do you diagnose them? Is that what you're saying?
That's a secondary question, but I was just, really interested to know
Where
how do
they
you know you've even got one if we're only 50%?
Yes. So we generally buy all of our strains from the because a lot of the standardisation work, all the labs have to use the same strain because we have to try and get the same results. And certainly when we do all this commercial testing, for the ISO, they say you have to use this particular strain. So they'll say you have to use acanthamoeba castellanii, ATCC number 50370. That's what you have to use, and so we tend to do that rather than use clinical strains.
Sorry, can I just shout out to the 3 people at the back here who are from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, that acanthamoeba reference lab. So you guys might want to chip in too.
Yes, very interesting, some of your slides regarding the treatment. So we run a acanthamoeba diagnostic service. We get about 500 referrals a year from everywhere except Moorfields, pretty much. But we have introduced this year a very sensitive quantitative PCR service, and we run it in parallel with a culture service. And we're finding, unsurprisingly, that the PCR is more sensitive than the culture. And that is exactly what we're finding. We think the samples have been treated before the sample was taken from the eye, so the whatever preservative or the anaesthetic might be killing the acanthamoeba, so it won't grow, but the DNA is still detectable. Of course, the DNA may be dead. The dead parasite, we can't tell that at the moment either. But yeah, we're seeing quite a lot of samples. We're very interested to talk to you. And we have also we have an archive of probably several hundred samples from publications.
What's PCR?
It's an amplification method that detects DNA of the parasite. So it allows them to.
So even if they were dead, the DNA would still be there, so you can still detect them.
In terms of when we validated the assay this year, it's been very interesting because we, like you, assumed that the culture was not so sensitive, but what we've done is we've done limiting dilutions of cysts from various species of acanthamoeba, and we can culture one cyst without any problem whatsoever. So if you get the cyst in your sample, we can grow it, and the PCR can also detect it. Interestingly, our PCR is also not infallible. We have some culture positive and PCR negative, and we think that might be due to sampling and numbers in the sample that we get.
So we've got Dr. Scott Roby here. In terms of diagnosis of acanthamoeba, did you have any comments to make?
Well, yeah, it's fascinating talk. I mean, I learned a lot of new things. I work at St Thomas's. I was latterly at Moorfields, and shortly before I started at St Thomas's, we shifted, the microbiologists there shifted from using culture to diagnose acanthamoeba to PCR, and it makes you wonder whether that should be a uniform shift across the country. I mean, should we be using a test that's only 50% sensitive to try and pick up this condition, given how important it is to
Possibly
catch it early?
a mixture of the two. So when I've been at the Leicester Royal Infirmary, they will sort of do, as you do both of them. So they'll take the corneal scrape, and there may not be very much there, but they'll split it and do PCR on half and culture on the other. If you can get culture, there are added benefits of that. So at least then it could go to the laboratory, it can be axonized or grown in the laboratory, and then we could do a drug sensitivity profile of it. So certainly if the patient isn't responding to treatment, it may have added benefit. So for instance, if they're not responding to PHMB, maybe we could sort of check from the drug sensitivity profile, maybe the patient could receive something like naltefosine instead, to see if that would have some added benefit. So there are advantages and obviously sort of disadvantages.
Yeah, because the microbiologists and scientists just said it's going to be one or the other.
Yeah.
And I do wonder about the capacity for some departments to do the level of testing that you obviously do,
Yeah.
and perhaps in Leicester, but I wonder whether they would go to those lengths of tests.
Yeah, so when I spoke to Leicester, they were saying that we probably get 2 or 3 a year, so for them
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Not a massive
For Moorfields it makes a lot of sense perhaps, but
Yeah. I guess the other thing about having the growing the acanthamoeba is that you recall when we were working together at Moorfields, we had an increase in the number of cases, but also an increase in the severity of cases. So by having the organism, we can do further genetic tests, we can test it, how it performs against drugs and in different environments. Whereas if we have the PCR, it's destroyed in the test. We don't know if it is dead or alive, the acanthamoeba, so it is less, it does have its limitations. So we would prefer that, people do both, but it just depends. Yeah, Mr. West.
So what place does confocal scan play in this then? Surely that's used for diagnosis as well?
Yes, so not every hospital will have access to sort of confocal diagnosis. Obviously, it's one of the things that's done at Moorfields, but for instance, Leicester Royal Infirmary, also New Cross in Wolverhampton, neither of them have access to a confocal, so they would have to do theirs by sort of culture or mixture of culture and PCR.
Yeah. So the thing with confocal is that it's black and white, and things that are in the cornea that may not be acanthamoeba, such as the white blood cells, can look like the acanthamoeba cyst.
They're all about the same size, so
Yeah.
it's very difficult to...
And so what we do find when we do studies of the confocal, it's important that people are trained in it, because people who are not used to seeing it can often get it confused. So our next speaker, Hari, is going to talk about some new novel ways that we may diagnose, and there may be better ways that we can incorporate the confocal.
Just before we go there, I've got 1 or 2
Yeah,
questions from the group, if that's right. I don't want to leave anything out, but
Do you want to set up?
there's a couple of things, Wayne, that I might email you about later.
Yeah, sure, that's absolutely fine.
And then I might post the answer on the group, because it might be a bit of a longer response.
Yeah, sure, no
but
problem.
can you just elaborate a little bit? Our group talks a lot about naltefosine. I think it's called impavido. And some of the patients in the AK community have had it as oral medication. Some have sworn that that's what did it, and some have said that it didn't work for them. Can you tell us a little bit more about the work that you've done and what else might be needed in order to make miltefosine a proper medication?
Yeah, so again, a fuller answer I will have to ask for you from the Leicester Royal Infirmary. So when we did the last all of this testing for miltefosine, we spoke to Jeremy Prydle, who's one of the consultant surgeons there, and he came to us and asked us, he's got a patient that wasn't responding to treatment and was quite desperate, and they had done, they'd approached Leicester Royal Infirmary about having miltefosine, and they'd asked us for our opinion on it. When we showed them all of our our screening results, and on the basis of that, I believe the patient then was given miltefosine. Initially, the Royal Infirmary were unable to source it, so it is a problem. It does have a use. Primarily, it's used for treating leishmania infection.
Yeah.
So there are certain hospitals that may have it. Certainly, the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham, which is where the soldiers that contract leishmania come back to the UK to, would have access to miltefosine. But again, that was one of the problems that the Royal Infirmary had, was sourcing it initially.
Yeah. But so you're on your charts, was it saying, like, in terms of like comparative efficacy?
Yeah, it's not in terms of in vitro. This was against sort of polyphydra and castellanii. So it's not as good as PHMB. It works in a slightly different way. It does target the cell membrane. Its full mechanism of action isn't known. So, but if you're not responding to PHMB, obviously it is a potential option to be used. So, but yeah, in the lab it does work.
And can I just ask one other question about topical versus oral medication, and why is it that like voriconazole, miltefosine can be given orally, but you can't?
PHMB is a disinfectant, so
right. You just wouldn't, wouldn't get there. So voriconazole and posaconazole are ergosterol biosynthesis inhibitors. So they ergosterol is a component of the acanthamoeba cell membrane. It's a bit like our cholesterol that's contained within our sort of cell membranes. So it can be given orally. It's absorbed into the body. It can be given as drops as well. But yeah, it's absorbed quite well into the body. But obviously, with systemically given drugs, you can also get an increase in toxicity. Voriconazole and posaconazole can cause problems with the kidneys as well, because they can cause sort of damage to sort of cholesterol synthesis as well. And visual disturbance. I described it as the disco in my head after I took the tablets. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was voriconazole.
Yeah. I don't know if anyone else had that.
Just a quick shout out to Elena over here, who is the education lead at the Research Centre at Moorfields Eye Hospital, and the lead nurse for the ODAC trial. Elena, could you just tell us what that trial is about and where you're at with that?
Yeah, this trial is treatment that's been tested for acanthamoeba keratitis at the moment. It's not just at Moorfields, it's Europe-wide, and we're looking to recruit 130 patients. At the moment in Moorfields, I think we're up to about 80. Total in UK, we're at about 80. And Moorfields, we've recruited 42 of that trial. It's so far the response from patients has been quite successful. We've had some patients, I think about 4 patients that we had to remove from the trial fairly early because of complication. The medication is not obviously suitable for them. And we have one of the patients behind us.
That trial is designed to try to get a licensed product of the PHMB, because I guess with all of these drugs, the PHMB is, the head and shoulders really above, most of the other drugs, isn't it? Yeah.
So the dosage for this trial is 0.08% versus 0.02%.
Yeah, which is the standard.
Could I just ask one more question? I was diagnosed in December of 2017, and I was prone to PHMB and Broly, similar to what you said before, every hour for 3 days, and then every other hour for the next 2 weeks. My recovery was quite quick to start with, and then obviously after about 5 to 6 weeks they introduced Dexafree, obviously to take the inflammation down. And then after about 2 months I was then reduced down to 2 drops every day, and I had a relapse. Once the relapse come back, obviously they increased the amount again. 2 months later I had another relapse where the same as that, a ring around my eye.
Yeah.
And then for about 5 to 6 months the PHMB and the Broline did nothing. They just could not get rid of it. I was just wondering, from your research, does it get to a point where the acanthamoeba can resist against?
In theory, yeah. I guess in any population, if you apply a selection pressure, if there are any sort of organisms within that population that show some resistance, you're going to kill the ones that have less resistance, and then the ones that have more resistance will then proliferate. So yeah, they're almost certainly.
Because it must have been a good 5 months where I was still on the PHMB and the Broline, nothing. I was then admitted back into the Birmingham Eye Hospital, where they put me on to chlorhexidine and voriconazole and also the tablets, and that seemed to do the trick.
And I'm looking at some people around the room, and that story will be quite familiar. Like, so often what can happen with acanthamoeba is that it can be under control, and then it can rear its head again. And you know what? This is the nature of the organism, that it can go into these cysts and it can live there quite happily until the conditions are right again, and then it will come back in. And so that can be a very frustrating journey for the disease. Yeah.
The cyst is a survival mechanism, so if you expose it to drugs, it will know that and it will just form a cyst. And things like Broline are not really good. Obviously Broline can in terms of, but the cyst is so resistant and it's so difficult to do, and then as soon as the drug levels drop again, they can come back out.
So I think, Scott, like one of the big problems is trying to manage the inflammation versus the infection, particularly in acanthamoeba. So the Dexafree is like the steroid drop to try to calm down the eye, because a lot of the damage and the scarring is caused by the immune cells. But we need to sort of balance that with, you know, the drugs that are killing the organism, and sometimes we just kind of have to wait and see what happens.
Okay. So I've got one more question.
Yeah.
Is there a role, do you think, for pulse therapy, where you exploit that opportunity, where they insist initially very quickly, and then they could emerge from that stage back to trophozoa stage, and then you would bombard them with something when they're a bit more exposed to it,
it's
and then you would maybe give it a pause for a few days, and then
potentially, yes. It is one of the things that we've been looking at in the lab. So we published a paper about 3 or 4 years ago now, where we identified that they use an adrenergic system receptor in order to insist, and so we've been trying to flip that process on its head, because essentially it is only exposure to amino acids that makes them go from the cyst stage to the trophozoite stage. So we're looking to see exactly, trying to identify, is there a particular receptor involved, because if that was the case, there would be the potential then to expose them to a particular drug that would cause the transformation from the cyst stage to the trophozoite stage, and then you would then be able to kill them much more easily. And that's one of the things that we're also, which I didn't mention today, is what we're also working on. So we worked out that we can give them, it seems to be an adrenergic receptor that they seem to use, so if we give them drugs like dobutamine, adrenaline, they will insist quite rapidly, and then we can block the process by using beta-1 non-specific beta antagonists. So there seems to be a process. We can also block catecholamine synthesis in the amoeba, and then lose the ability to insist as well. But we're just trying to work out what actually makes them patch out, which would be quite an interesting thing to find.
I think there was like a wave of, I think Simon Kewington spoke at a Bowman's meeting and talked about Timor, and there was a wave of using that, but I think we should maybe go and have a look at the response and just see if, you know, there was. But of course when you use it, like when you use steroids, you tend to use it for the severe cases, and then you're a bit biased, but it's something we should look into. Cool. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening everyone. Myself Hari. I'm a PhD student with Nicole, working back sharing my work, what I did since last year when I joined my PhD, what I'm up to and what my aim is to do with this diagnosis of acanthamoeba. As you can see, the name nano diagnosis of acanthamoeba. That's what it's like nano. I'm using a nanoparticle, not for the treatment, for the diagnosis. Yeah, I'm not going into all the details because Wayne has covered everything for me. Yeah, but for the first sentence which I like to say that was first described in humans in 1970s. But the organism was first described in 1940s, somewhere around. But the first keratitis was described in humans in 1970s. And these are the two organisms which are mostly isolated or which are seen causing keratitis in patients. And because they are present more in the environment, that might be the reason. As you see, there's like a trophozoitensis which can switch between them.
A mouse.
Needs more batteries in that.
It worked for me.
Yeah, this is a cartoon which again says it gets attached to the cornea. But one thing is like there should be a damage to the cornea for acanthamoeba to enter, because we're exposed to acanthamoeba trophozoite every time. But you can ask me, but the contact lens act as a reservoir which can lead the organism to enter. But for a normal person, without wearing contact lens, like everyone is getting exposed to acanthamoeba, but why we are not getting? Because there is no damage. But if there is a damage, then our corneal cells will express mannose more, which attracts the organism to enter into, which with the help of mannose binding protein in the organism, it attaches and it enters and causes the damage. It goes on. As I said, cis does not bind or minimally bind, but the contact lens can hold the cis as a reservoir and it can enable that organism to exist and enter the eye. There are so many risk factors, right? Like swimming with contact lens, trauma with contaminated water, inactivity of the contact lens solutions, prolonged use of contact lens cases rather than the suggested day, or improper cleaning of the contact lenses, especially with water, and storing the contact lenses with the tap water. These are the some risk factors which can lead to the disease. Then this is what incidence of acanthamoeba keratitis, which was published by Nicole and John Dart from Moorfields data, which says that you can see there is increase in the cases, as you see from 2000 to 2016. Then, as I said, I'm not trying to kill it. First, I want to diagnose it as early as possible, because we have already all these things which are there, like culturing the organisms, which we are discussing, and PCR, which is a sensitive method to identify the DNA, and confocal microscopy. I think the people who are seeing in Moorfields, like Scott doing it, everything has its own limitations. Only confocal is the one which we can do without any sample, but others require a sample. With this, I just thought we can do something with the help of nanoparticles without taking the sample. We wanted to make a fluorescent or the dye which glows up and bind it to the acanthamoeba and see whether we can diagnose. That's how I'm working it, and I'm working with something called linear double hydroxyl nanoparticles, which the beauty of this is we can easily modify the nanoparticles. We can load the dye into that, we can load the drug into that, because it has been widely used, and the size is like 100 nanometers, which is like 100 times lesser than a hair follicle. If you measure it, it's like much smaller. With this, what we thought is like we add some fluorescent dye to that and tie it to the organism, with the aim saying that develop a diagnostic agent that can identify and rapidly diagnose. We could do series of experiments. We have developed a nanoparticles with fluorescent labeled, and we try to bind it. The first step, we thought because acanthamoeba is like, we are trying to play with the charge of the acanthamoeba, because everything has its charge. We wanted to play with the acanthamoeba charge because it has negative charge and our nanoparticles are positive charge. We thought they might attract each other. Then they might bind, but ultimately happened is my nanoparticles did not bind to acanthamoeba but got settled down in the solution. First, the major problem is that. Then I went ahead see whether actually there is a aggregation or settling down of the nanoparticles is happening in the medium. Then I could confirm that, and I used something else to avoid that. Something called Higgs buffer in the medium, but it doesn't work. Then we use something called Bowen's serum albumin to make my nanoparticles more stable so that it will not react with anything and it just goes and attacks acanthamoeba. But it did not happen, but ultimately the good thing happened is, for me, there is no aggregation. I'm at the stage of developed nanoparticles which are fluorescently labeled, but it's not binding. My further work will be to modify this nanoparticle such that it goes and binds to acanthamoeba. At least I can show that in lab so that I can further work on that to get into the clinic. It might be a long way, but it's my strong feeling that I might achieve someday. And we could not achieve the binding, but we could make the nanoparticles stabilize. And we are collaborating with other professors in our university to different way of imaging. That's already we have started working, but we did not do any lab work yet, but we are in the initial stage of it. Hopefully, this is my just brief summary of my research in last 9 months. Yeah, and these are my supervisors, Mark and Nicole. You can see here, and she's Sophia. She's a chemical engineering. She's from chemical engineering. She helps me synthesize the nanoparticles, and other people who are helping me. Thank you.
Do we have any questions for Hari? Yes.
Harry, sorry, I may have missed it. How do the nanoparticles bind to the acanthamoeba?
Yeah, actually, see, one thing what we thought is like mannose is the one which binds.
Yeah.
But I was talking to Wayne last week. He said he tried something, but it did not work.
Right.
Yeah, our hypothesis was like just to play with the charge of the nanoparticles and try to see there's attraction happening. That doesn't happen. Then the further modifications is like seeing with targeting some sites where I can attach that. That I'll be working later, because it took a lot of time, because I'm an optometrist. From back part of the eye jumped to front part of the eye after working 8 years. Then I was learning all these things, and I could synthesize the nanoparticles and measure the charge and everything. And we did few experiments last couple of months, and which did not work. That's what the research goes. Then hopefully I could I can establish in the lab where it can bind. There will be challenges when it comes to the eye, but at least in the lab we can show that initially.
Yeah, I don't have much experience with confocal, so although some experienced optometrists can say that it's acanthamoeba, but others can't, is that the issue?
Yeah, in some cases it's very difficult to tell because you just get like a white light reflection of it, and so it can look like just the neutrophils, which you often get at that stage. So it can be quite difficult to pick it up. So what we're hoping to do is to light them up with some fluorescent dye, but we've got to find first what we can attach the nanoparticle to attach to acanthamoeba. But Nahari's done a great job. He's only been at it for 9 months, and we've got really good collaborations with Sophia, she's doing nanoparticles attaching to cancer cells, for example. So
because already it's established, and they've shown why we are using these nanoparticles is like they have shown in the very less toxicity, and they can get degraded in the body easily. But one thing what I was thinking is like whatever the nanoparticles we need to test that how that is affecting the acanthamoeba as well. There are challenges, but hopefully we'll get through that.
So it's very important that they degrade, because we don't want people walking around with fluorescent lights forever. All right.
Does that mean then you might be able to get to a stage where you could attach something that kills acanthamoeba to the nanoparticles so it just gets to it
Ultimately,
directly?
the first aim is to diagnose, then ultimately we can add up to things, because nanoparticles are I feel like that we can do anything with that. We can change it, we can modify it, we can add things, we can remove things, we can add drugs as well, so that it can identify and kills at the same time.
In like 5 minutes,
Yeah.
in one visit to the clinic.
Great.
Where is this? Like 10 years ago.
Early slides had an image showing the number of cases that had been done with Moorfields, and it's there are two things I noticed about it. One, that it's a steady increase in the last, I can't remember, it's something like 7 years to a decade, and then there was a previous bump indicating that there was an increase. Has that been considered in? Well, it's not going to be that much longer because it wasn't known beforehand. But are there any theories on why the increase is happening, and if there is an expectation that it's going to continue or accelerate?
Yeah, one thing is, like I already Rohit has been explained, there are some solutions which did not give. There was an outbreak initially where there's a bump, then it went down, and it is slowly increasing because the number of contact lens wearers are increasing. There can other practices, like people are buying contact lenses offline, their practices, and all those things might contribute. You cannot say it's like one thing which is contributing the increase. They can multifactorial that's contributing to the cost. Still, it is very less, but still, it is like, as we see, it's a devastating thing that can happen.
It's probably also worth just adding, for people's information, that in the study that was published that Nicole was an author on in
The end of last year.
December, January time. One of the factors, there was a number of factors cited, as Harry's just said, a number of factors cited as being responsible for this increase that we're experiencing at the moment. But one issue was to do with a particular contact lens solution, and it wasn't.
Oxycolor.
Is an ingredient in the solution which was found to compromise the solution's efficacy against killing the bug. Is that right?
Yeah. I actually think, like in my point, you might have a different idea about this, but the solution was a different type of solution, so it worked like quite quickly, like a peroxide solution, and then there was like not as much activity of the solution. But it was marketed as a way as a multi-purpose solution, which with the multi-purpose solutions you can keep them for longer because you don't get as much decrease. So I think the way that it was marketed also contributed to it.
So it is just worth saying this, and I should be the one that says it and not anyone else in the room, but if you were using a product, a disinfection product made by Specsavers called Easy Vision, or if you were using a product called Synergy, made originally by a company called Soflon, then you should probably, and you were diagnosed between 2014 and 2017, 18.
Yeah, because it's been withdrawn from the market now, yeah.
Then you may want to talk to a lawyer. I can't tell you anything more than that, and I know that some people have and haven't had much success. If you do want to chat about this anymore, then let me know. I can't offer any advice, but I can certainly point you to people that have had those conversations. And it's a bit of a it's just worth knowing.
I should ask a general question. I mean, it's not in particular related to this, but just discussing contact lens solutions, and it's kind of what you were on your slides earlier. But to what extent are all those products available on the market? Do they actually destroy acanthamoeba? I mean, just like your general contact lens cleaners, are they effective against acanthamoeba?
You mean the list of drugs that I showed?
Yeah, no, I mean just like the normal, your bog standard, what you get, you go down to the...
So there's no legal, so there's no ISO standards currently for acanthamoeba disinfection. However, you wouldn't be able to bring a solution to market without demonstrating the efficacy. But if you look at the standards for, say, you've got to demonstrate efficacy against bacteria and fungi. Currently, all it says for bacteria and fungi is that you have to kill 3 log reduction of bacteria, which is 99.9% of the organisms that are there, and in fungi, it's 1 log, which is 90% of the organisms that are there. But standards are reasonably meaningless for some of these solutions in terms of what they're supposed to do.
Yeah. So really, like the contact lens solutions won't make your contact lens sterile. There are still going to be some organisms in it, and things that that people might do, which is just a part of using contact lenses. If your case is older and there's bacterial biofilm building up, which is a food source for acanthamoeba, you might be more likely to get it, and those sorts of things. So, but we also see it in daily disposable lenses. And we've just published on the reusable lenses. We are now looking into the risk factors for daily disposable lenses as well. And it's not necessarily that people are using them incorrectly. It may be that they are not aware of things like water and showering in lenses that might contribute. But we will hopefully have that analysis out in the next few months.
We're getting a lot more cosmetic lenses being sent to us for diagnostics. So either the tiny ones or the cat size or the vampire ones, are they more likely to be abrasive, for example, on the eye surface?
Sometimes there are, like the way that they're manufactured, they might have a coating or a lamination that's not 100%, so it may be something related to the manufacture, but it may also be like the behaviour, so people don't realise that they're marketed like almost like cosmetics, so people don't realise that they're a medical device and treat them with the same sort of care. We've heard reports of people swapping lenses in nightclubs and things like that. And I remember Irene, we were doing some work and Irene someone popped to the local pharmacy and came back with contact lenses that looked like they were lipstick, it was just...
Yeah, and it was me. I paid 12 quid and I just got them just like that.
Yeah. Oh, we've got the MHRA
Sorry, I
here.
just wanted to just pick up on one thing that you said there, just because I'm a pedant.
Yeah.
Is that cosmetic contact lenses, like you mentioned, the vampire and whatever, they're not actually medical devices yet. So we've got some new regulations which come into force next year in 2020, May 2020. And when they come into force, there's this annex of it called Annex 16, and those particular products will be then classed as medical devices under Annex 16.
Yeah.
So they're not currently.
Yeah.
But
I think
they should be. And so I was kind of saying that as a bit of a reassurance that you may find that the way they are manufactured could change
because of that.
Because they will actually be classed as medical devices, whereas currently there's not that level of regulation.
Yeah.
And
Although
come under that as well. So
although the law states that they must be prescribed with a qualified practitioner on the premises, they must be prescribed under supervision, and they're not. So that's an issue, regardless of the fact that they're not classed as.
I was just picking up on the fact that you may find that it will be harder for people to just make things that the manufacturers won't be able to just make things and flog them because they'll be held to account of the fact that they have.
But will people be able to buy them over the internet and then just stick them in their eyes, or will they, once it's classed as a medical device, does it have to be prescribed, essentially?
No, it
You
doesn't
can
have
just
to be
buy it off the
prescribed.
shelf.
No, it's just that there will be tighter regulation on what
Purely a manufacturing sort of level.
But also, it will include things like labelling and instructions for use. They would have to have the same as correct contact lenses.
I'll come on to that in a minute. But should we?
That you agree with. I just want to tell you a little bit about what happened to me. So this was the day that I got diagnosed, or that I came into Moorfields Eye, forever etched in my memory. I'll never forget this day, of course. I've got to do this day. Came in with a sore eye. It was a bit runny. I was quite light sensitive, so I couldn't go in my kitchen. We had fluorescent lights under the units, and I just found it like really, really sore. And thought I'd better get myself off to Moorfields because they're the best in the world, and they'll fix me. Yes, that's what I did. This was like me trying to take a selfie a few days later. My eye had got really, really inflamed and was very, very sore. I couldn't open the curtains at home. you should know that this is absolutely a horrendous thing. So anything that you're doing to improve diagnosis so that we don't have to have scrapes is a really, really positive thing, because it's the scariest, most awful experience to go through when someone's coming at you with a needle. And they say a local anaesthetic, but it doesn't stop it from hurting.
You scrape it away.
You scrape it away. Yeah. As lots of you will know, this is my chart where I was keeping account of all the drops that I was on. Forgive the spelling mistakes in there, some of the drugs got spelled wrongly by me and my husband. I had a Tupperware box, which was, I think, originally Tuck Shop Mice, and ended up being all the different painkillers, anti-inflammatories, drops, everything. And I was on this schedule of doing them, as many of you would have been, hourly, and then 2 hourly, and add this one in, and then add that one in, and then take this one out and add that one in. And it took me a few months before I realised that if I put it all on my phone, it would be easier. So I had an old-fashioned notebook for a while. And that's what I did, and things just got worse and worse and worse and worse. And this is me, a few weeks in. I got this ring infiltrate, which you see on the very beautifully taken photography. I had, the actual ring in my eye. I remember coming to Moorfields and doctors going, "Oh, wow, it's a textbook acanthamoeba, it's brilliant." And I was like, "It's not brilliant. It's really, really horrible." Always remember that there's a person behind the classical signs and symptoms. We're people, and it really hurts. For whatever reason, I don't know why, I had a really bad course of disease, and I didn't respond, even though I got diagnosed relatively quickly, within a week. And actually, lots of you would have had prolonged diagnosis and would have taken a while to get to where you are. I got diagnosed really quickly, but it just didn't go well. I got put on PHMB very, very quickly, and I just deteriorated massively. I got a secondary inflammation in my eye called scleritis, which some of you would have had. It's horrendous. It's even more painful than AK actually. So the whole of the white of your eye becomes red. You can see it there, it's I don't know, the most painful thing I've ever experienced in my life. And I had a baby boy last year, and it's still the most tremendously painful thing I've experienced in my life. For that, I was taking immunosuppression orally, so lots of different combinations of steroids and then other drugs to try and control the sort of raging inflammation going on in my eye. At the same time as trying to get on top of the amoeba. Absolutely worst time of my life. And nothing was working. About 18 months in, Prof Dart, who was looking after me, and the team in Clinic 4 here at Moorfields City Road, had tried everything, and they said, okay, so the next line of treatment is chemotherapy. We're going to put you on chemo. And I was like, what? Like, how is this possible? This was to control the scleritis, not to treat the amoeba. That should be important to be stressed. But and I said, but I've just got married and I want to have a baby, and I don't want my facility to be compromised by this. And so they said, oh no, of course you can't have this drug. We're going to have to go away and think about it. Go away and we'll figure out a plan B. And that's what they did. Prof Dart, who was absolutely amazing during this time, rang me on a Sunday and said, I've been thinking about it, and I think that we can use this particular drug that's never been used in this context before, and we'll give it to you and we'll see if it helps control this inflammation and dampen it down, and it won't affect your future plans to have children under chemotherapy. But we've never done it before, and we don't have a license to do it here at Moorfields, so you're going to have to go to another hospital to get it done. But I've sorted it out, and you're going on Thursday, and it was all done just like that. Amazing. Got special permission to have this drug called infliximab. It's used in autoimmune disease a lot, and it's a very sophisticated but very expensive form of immunosuppressive therapy. So I had that. I had a number of infusions of that over a number of months, and that eventually calmed down my eye, and I didn't lose it, which was the risk. I was going to lose my eye if I didn't have anything to infected immune graft, which is why it's really important to make sure, if you can, that the AK is gone before you have your surgery. This gets asked a lot, why can't I just have an operation sooner? And it's because your doctors are trying to make sure that it's gone, and so this doesn't happen. And unfortunately, this happened to me. So anyway, long story short, more surgeries. I had another graft a year later because my cornea perforated, and there's me waving at my family who were at a wedding and I couldn't go because I was going to have my surgery. This will be long story, but eventually, for whatever reason, and I'm not a typical case at all, so don't take anything I say as kind of what's going to happen to anybody else. My eye eventually got really bad inflammation at the back, lost pressure, and then it's just stopped working. And so I am permanently, unfortunately, blind in this eye, and I wear a cosmetic lens over the top to cover the scarring and the discoloration because my eyes are quite grey underneath and very, I guess, unsightly for me. So I wear a cosmetic lens to cover it all up. There's lots of drugs that I had to take. And so when all this was going on, obviously, as all of you, many of you would have done, I did loads of soul searching. Why did it happen? Why did it happen to me? What could I have done differently to stop this from happening? It was really, really weird as well because in the questions that I got asked at the hospital or by other people within the kind of optical community, it was like, oh, were you a contact lens wearer? And then it was, oh, did you do any of those bad hygiene practices? And when I did research online, it was like, acanthamoeba is associated with people with very poor contact lens hygiene. And I was like, but I wore daily disposables, and I wouldn't call myself an unhygienic person, and I didn't ever lick them or drop them on the floor and put them back in my eye or anything like that. I just did what I thought I was supposed to do, and I still got it. So why is it that this kind of narrative around poor hygiene is like coming up again and again and again? And it's sort of a bit judgy, isn't it? It's a bit like, oh, you didn't do the right things, and so that's why you got it. And this really bothered me and upset me, and the more I looked into it, the more I realised that it was this sort of like pervasive narrative of what was going on with people with AK. It's like, oh, they were the ones that didn't follow instructions, they were the ones that had poor hygiene, they were the ones that didn't do what they were supposed to do. And sort of just felt really unfair. Because every time I spoke to anybody about what happened to me, contact lens wearers or not, everyone went, I have no idea that could happen. I literally had no clue that it could be that bad, that that could happen. So I thought if you've got an eye infection, you just take some medicine and it would go away. And then I thought about it a bit more, and I was like, well, it's really, really weird because there's nothing to suggest that, it's not known that risky behaviours include exposing your lenses to water. And water and poor hygiene aren't two things that kind of necessarily fully compute with each other. If you're using water, you're not necessarily being unhygienic in most people's judgment. And so, well, this is wrong, and what can I do to change it? Which is a really weird kind of response, I guess. But I just felt, and I know from getting to know lots of you, that it's such a horrible thing that you sort of feel compelled to do something. You just said to me, Ian, that one of the reasons you're here is because you feel that way. And I know lots of you that I know personally feel that way too. So it was just a thing. It wasn't like that any of us are kind of superhuman amazing people, but you just get this burning feeling that you've got to do something to stop it from happening to somebody else. So I started to look into what exists, what information exists, what did I miss, what did I not know about, what did I ignore, what did I willingly overlook. And I remember being given, I don't know, a contact lens leaflet when I first got lenses when I was about 12 years old. And then I looked at my contact lens box and I thought, well, there should be something there. There isn't anything there. And there's no information on the contact lens box at all to tell you to avoid water or to take precautions when wearing lenses. There's no leaflet inside a contact lens box, unlike every time you buy a packet of paracetamol or you know, there's just nothing there. It's just the box and the lenses inside, and that's it. And then you look around at the marketing of contact lens products, and you go, oh my gosh, there's so many images of water to do with contact lenses that maybe are subliminally on one level telling people that it's okay to expose your lenses to water, to wear them at the beach, to go swimming with them. You know, it just felt really weird to me that this was the situation in marketing land, and yet in the kind of like regulation land there was all this stuff about contact lenses and medical devices, and it should be treated with care and it should be provided with warnings that aren't happening. So I decided to try and do something about it. So I wasn't anything sophisticated, but I designed this thing. I contacted the BCLA, the British Contact Lens Association, on Twitter, and I said, I think we should put warning on contact lens boxes, and they said, yeah, but you know, about water specifically, but there's loads of other things that we'd have to put on, and there's no room on the box, and we just couldn't do it, and thanks very much, but contact lens packaging is produced centrally and had to work in lots of different languages, so we couldn't write it in English, and blah, 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 loads of excuses about why they couldn't do it, and so I designed this thing, and I said, look, I think this works in every language, I think you can put this, it doesn't take up lots of room, ignore the bit at the bottom, that's the name of the campaign, so it's just the tap with the prohibition sign in it, and I did another version with H2O in it, and a line through it, but anyway, I sent it to them, they ignored it, I tried to contact them again, they ignored me again. Eventually I found out that they were doing a conference and they had a speaker, a friend of Nicole's, speaking about acanthamoeba, and I asked if I could go. So I just contacted them and said, please can I come along to this lecture, I think it'd be interesting, and then when I was there I kind of like just press scanned the president of BCLA and said, have you looked at my logo yet? What do you think? She said, actually no, we discussed it in the committee today, and we actually think it might be a good idea. And so together we decided to come up with this idea of putting the no water stickers on contact lens boxes. My sort of inspiration for this was when I was a kid, a relative number of people used to get killed every year from drink driving, because drink driving, when I was a younger child, not that old, but a little bit old, drink driving was quite common, and you'd hear quite a lot of reports in the news of people being killed by drunk drivers, and over many, many years of behaviour change campaigns and commitment from government and from the driving industry, the statistics changed, and far fewer people are killed on the road by drunk drivers than were sort of 25, 30 years ago. And there's a paper that supports this that I read and thought was really interesting. So I thought, well, if they've done it, then I think that we can do it too. And the other analogy I had was seatbelts in the back of cars. How many of you, when you were kids, didn't wear a seatbelt in the back of the car? But now, most people do. Almost everyone does because it's safer. There's other analogies as well from so the feminine hygiene industry, tampons is the same. So I thought, well, if they can all do it, then we can do it, and there's no excuses, there's no anything. So anyway, convinced the BCLA to make these no water stickers. So the ones on the right are from the British Contact Lens Association, the ones on the left are from the American Academy of Optometry, who found out about what we've done in the UK and said we want to do it as well in the States. And also Nick has been amazing at like unlocking the Australian Cornea and Contact Lens Society of Australia, who have just created their own version of the stickers, which I should have had on here as well. So we've got no water stickers in the UK, in America, and in Australia. And we are talking to people in the Chinese region and in France as well.
In France,
yeah. So the thing about this is that they're all voluntary. So here they are on contact lens boxes. The stickers are available to purchase from the BCLA. They should be free, but unfortunately the BCLA charge for them. And the thing is that it's up to members, it's up to optometrists to put them on the boxes that go out to customers, and that's not, in my view, it's a good first step, but it's not good enough. They need to be automatically on the boxes. The warning needs to be printed, stamped on there, which is why I'm not talking to you guys. But anyway, Clearlab is a contact lens manufacturer, quite a small manufacturer, but they were the first to say, okay, well, let's not rely on opticians to put them out there. Let's put them on competition, let's put them on, and then send them out from there. She was amazing. I got an award at the House of Lords, which is great. And I've done a bunch of talks. That's me and John Dart, bottom left, giving a talk at the Royal Society of Medicine at a conference called 100% Optical, which talks to a lot of contact lens practitioners. We've done them for ophthalmologists, we've done them for junior doctors, all over the place, telling this story and trying to encourage people to get on the contact lens no water campaign. 2 years ago, the General Optical Council decided to run a Love Your Lenses campaign and asked me to be the kind of main, I'll come back to that, the main feature on it. So I ended up doing an article on BBC News, and following off the back of that, the NHS Twitter account is run by a different person every week, like patient, clinician, researcher, somebody to do with health. And I got given the NHS account to run on Twitter back in 2017 for a week, and that was awesome. Got loads and loads of reach with the message and told my story and tried to encourage people to spread the word about water and lenses not mixing. I've got the patient information leaflet here, which we did in this room. This is now being has been translated into, I think, 5 languages, being used not just by Moorfields but hospitals all over the world. Even where they get kind of 1 or 2 cases, doctors are handing it over and referring people to the website and stuff like that. So that's an amazing bit of impact as well. What I want to kind of chat to you guys about next is, so that's just one discrete thing, but there's so many problems and issues, and you'll have a better idea than I have about what needs to change. So where should this campaign go next? One thing that I think is really important is to get the manufacturers to change their packaging. So stop using water imagery in their marketing materials and start using different kind of imagery. I'm just going to show you. So this is Cooper Vision, who used to have, so the one on the left was what their biofinity lens used to look like. Weird imagery of water all over the pack, and they changed it to the one on the right, which I think is a really positive step. So I'm just calling them out and saying I think that should be praised.
Can I go back to when you tweeted them?
Sorry,
What the Specsavers, when you tweeted them saying about the imagery being
Specsavers?
Yeah,
They blocked me.
Did they?
Yeah, and I wrote to them as well, wrote them a paper letter and they ignored it. Yeah.
I'd probably like to say that the reason that the water is on contact lens packaging and on solutions is that the main reason that people drop out of contact lens wear is because of dryness, and so the imagery is to say that their product is moist and comfortable. So it's not, in a way that is trying to, have anything to do with water as such, but it's more to do with water. There was the worst one I saw though was on the American Super Bowl that one of the companies had a fishbowl on someone's head and said this is the most comfortable lens I've had. And I was like, God, how wrong is that? So from our side, from a contact lens practitioner side, until you alerted me to that, I had no idea, because we didn't see it in the same way. But now that we do, and we have written a paper together about water risks, looking at a review paper which looks at evidence-based studies, and we have published that information.
Yeah. My last point was.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's fine. My last point was just going to be that. So campaign, doing a bit of letter writing, trying to talk to the MHRA. Lots of different things going on, but one of the most rewarding and brilliant things where I've actually seen change is where I've collaborated with researchers. So, actually where I've collaborated with Nick, to be honest. Me and Nick she's in Australia, I'm in London, and we have a regular check-in, Skype call, and we just chuck around ideas, and I say, this is the thing that really kind of worries me, or she says that I've got an opportunity to meet and talk to these people, and off the back of that, we wrote a paper together, and the paper got published in Cornea course, my dad had a little cry when he saw it. So, you know, if anyone knows my dad, you know,
Yeah.
all the time. But
That's
but
so sweet.
yes, this like amazing kind of life-changing experience for me in my health has actually led to some really positive and good things. You know, and even meeting you guys and writing the leaflet and stuff like that. And so what I wanted to say is I don't at all feel like this is me and this is what I've done and blah 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 blah. I've always wanted to work with other patients, and other patients have come to me at the end of these sessions and gone, here's my business card, please can I help, please can I do this, please can I do that. I've got a legal background, I'm a graphic designer, I can you know, I can connect you with this and that person, and that's all kind of valued. And I still want to continue to do this stuff because it's sort of become a thing for me now. I think I'll do it for the rest of my life because I'm so passionate about it, and I find it so interesting. But I want help. I want everyone's help. So if you're up for helping, then let me know, and then we can formulate a plan for what we do next. So you know, in the meantime, like what you know, follow me on Twitter and retweet and stuff like that. But also let me know what else you need to do. Like who else should we go after? Like who else should we talk to? And what change can we make?
Stand up and just say that there are two other things that I really didn't talk about, which are attributed to the no water sticker, and one is that one of the contact lens companies, Alcon, funded a study for us to look at the no water sticker versus it was a randomized controlled trial of 200 contact lens patients, contact lens wearers, and that has just been, it was Momona's PhD study, so she recruited these 200 people. We found that she was completely blind to what they had, and they were unaware that some of them had the no water sticker on their case and some of them didn't. And we found that the ones that had the no water sticker were more their behaviour was better, and also the contact lens case was cleaner at the end of the 6 week period that they had it. So that is just starting to be published. We presented some of that data at the British Contact Lens Association. So if you see us when we tweet these papers, please retweet. I think that's a huge thing, that we've proved that the no water sticker works, and that's an amazing thing. The other thing, Simon and I are part of the ISO's committee for contact lenses. Sorry, Simon, Wayne and I are part of the ISO committee for contact lenses, and so as well as developing standards for acanthamoeba testing, we're also looking at labelling for contact lens packaging, and one of the labels is the no water sticker, the no water symbol. There are also another 13 labels. So we have to have this one because 13 can't fit on the box. But it's been seen now at that international level of regulators where people are sitting down and saying we need to have these visual warnings, and I think that's from what you've done, Irene, has really elevated it to that next level. So another clap. Ian's just got a
Yeah, I mean, I would just like to say tremendous amounts been done in the past 3 years. I was a contact lens user for 25 years. Never ever given any warnings about water. Okay, and then that's how I'm sure it's how I contracted the acanthamoeba. Things have changed an awful lot in 3 years now. That message has got. I talk to contact lenses all the time now, and an awful lot of them are aware of it. But still, frontline staff dispensing, prescribing, I think that's still a weakness. A few weeks ago, I visited opticians a lot last year because I had a lot of problems following the cataract operation, which I had to have after the acanthamoeba. And I was in my opticians once a month for a large part of last year, and I sat there more than once and listened to conversations between customers and the frontline staff in this opticians. It's not a chain. It's you know, a small opticians, not one of the chains that might have got mentioned earlier. Saying, you know, oh, I just love my contact lenses. I just love swimming in them. And I can't sit there and listen to that. I explode. But it's happening all the time still, and the opticians and the frontline staff do not have that message still.
Yeah, and it's disappointing, Ian, because I've been speaking at the British Contact Lens Association, the American Academy of Optometry, but you know who comes to those meetings? The people who are good practitioners, and the message is not getting out to people on the streets who are not vigilant in that way. Oh no, sorry. So I think it was a really important step that optometry today were here, and that a couple of you spoke to them, and that they hear the stories and that those stories get out. So I think we need to, work with our optical press, and we need to work with, universities, with students, and we remember we did that social media campaign through Moorfields at one point when, social media was still quite young, but I think there are numerous things that we can do, but we need a critical mass to do it. We need money, and we need to really get the message more thoroughly out there. Yeah. One of the things about contact lenses is that people think of it as a lifestyle choice, like and practitioners will say, look, I don't want to restrict people with, using lenses. A lot of people swim in lenses and nothing happens to them. And I say to them, and they say like, oh, well, only 5% of the population who could wear contact lenses wear contact lenses. And I say to them, you've got to be transparent about this disease. You've got to tell people that they can get it, because you are at the front line and you have that responsibility. It's a duty of care. And I say to them, you drive a car, people know about the warnings of driving a car, but they don't stop driving. Like, people are not going to stop wearing contact lenses. Maybe they'll just think, be more aware and have that information. But also, it's about giving people that information and then, deciding, or have people that come to the meetings that say, like, I'm a risk taker, I would have done that, I'm going to swim in them, this is what I'm going to do. And that's fine, like, we can't change, what people choose to do, but it's important that they have that information and that they're not being given information by opticians that it's okay, that there is no risk with
Just
it.
to put that in context, so it's some research that happened with the GLC did some research a few years ago, like 2017 I think. 1 in 3 contact lens wearers are unaware that showering in contact lenses is a risk factor for serious infection. That's 1 in 3, significant. 1 in 5 are unaware of swimming.
Can I just ask a simple question?
Yeah.
The last 100 AK cases here, how many haven't worn contact lenses?
When I was recruiting, I had 129 prospective in 18 months, and I was doing contact lens wearers, but I was aware of maybe 3 or 4 patients
So that's
in the clinic.
message, isn't it?
Yeah,
If
it's
you
contact
can say
lenses. Yeah.
categorically it's a massive risk associated with contact lens use, then it's self-explanatory. You don't need to do anything else.
Yeah, but still, if you look at the risk, it's in terms of people wearing contact lenses, it's 1 in 20,000 people. Yeah, 1 in 20,000 people. Bacterial eye infections are like 4 in 10,000. So it's like a factor of 20 less. It is a really rare thing that can happen, but it's so severe and it's devastating. Yeah.
Yeah, and well, I've got 2 points. The first one, just coming to what we were speaking about, that looking more broadly at the No Water campaign. Sure, I mean, maybe Scott or someone else can talk to this, but surely there's other, like as you're kind of mentioning with bacterial infection, surely, I mean, this isn't specific necessarily to acanthamoeba keratitis, not wearing your contact lenses in water. So I'm just wondering if there's other bodies doing what you two are doing a fantastic job doing, as in looking at other conditions which may also be caused by contact lens wear. But I don't know if it's not, you could get there's other infections which you can pick up from wearing your contact lenses in the swimming
Yeah,
pool.
so
Otherwise,
the main infection is from like a waterborne organism, Pseudomonas, with contact lenses. So again, you know, we do stress that about, you know, the water. So it's really something that we very strongly, the message should be quite strong. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, well, yes, I was just thinking maybe it would be beneficial for them not just to like realise the acanthamoeba issue, but maybe other issues. But the second one,
it's a good point, because when I go to speak, I only talk about acanthamoeba, like because of the severity. But maybe, you know, talking about other the bacterial diseases as well that are more common but less severe. Although Pseudomonas can be very severe, can't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Pseudomonas is the commonest bacterial cause of keratitis, and contact lens wear is certainly the main risk factor for it. I don't wear contact lenses, so.
No, I meant that maybe you see other things in your practice.
The product in there for a contact lens box.
There isn't one.
So I'm not entirely clear what disclaimers there are on there and what information is provided.
Honestly, there isn't one, but there's one buried on the back of the website somewhere. You know, but
I think that's something to look at in that there should be something there maybe that just says, look, if you get a red eye with your contact lens wear, you take out the lens immediately and you seek medical attention and you know, something basic like that would make a big difference.
Yes.
So in Brazil, we prescribe, as doctors, we prescribe lenses and we dispense them. So when I used to prescribe there, I had a prescription, everything written there. For example, how many days you can wear these contact lenses, what you need to do, everything, like don't take a shower, don't swim, and with a small explanation why not. And it was just a small paper, so every patient, it wouldn't depend if it was the first time or the second, or I would give this paper.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a copy of that?
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah.
Great. Even if it's in.
No, I always wrote it, but I
You
can
wrote
write
it,
to
write
I
it,
have back there. I can.
Are you required to do that, or you did it off your own back?
No.
So good practitioners will. But there's been like a lot of talk about different regulatory organisations that give different advice.
Protocol, for example.
Yeah, that's
every
right.
time that because for me it's very difficult because contact lenses are sold in websites.
Yeah.
And sometimes they don't know how to put or how to remove, and then they go to A&E just to remove it because they don't know.
Yeah.
So very basic things, people are not aware of them.
Yeah.
And maybe if the distribution could be more controlled, this is my opinion, it would be better. But if it's not, maybe have like a protocol or something written there.
Yeah. But I think it also depends upon how the information is given out. Like we have had, during the study we were talking about, you know, some people had been to certain companies and they'd had this like huge list of things and they had just been given it and not read it. Like, and I think one of the things that we've got a PhD project which we're trying to get a student for at the moment is behaviour change, like trying to make people read the leaflets, because when they look at studies, people don't often read the leaflets. So maybe it's like QR codes, looking at websites on the sticker. That's something that they're doing in Australia, or something, giving the information of this is why you don't do something. So I think there's a lot that we can do.
I would read everything with the patient, and then I would give just for him to remember. So I think this is a good way for them to keep in mind. But for me, the problem is when they buy it anywhere or everywhere, because you cannot control if they're going to read. And
it's a big problem though, isn't it? And it's like not one that probably will go away, because it's the way of the world now, and there is like the consumer choice lobby in the US that is saying that people should have the choice of buying contact lenses online or going to opticians or going to doctors. So, like, we don't agree with that, but you know that there are some big political players that push that side of things. So we're up against a bit sometimes.
I'm aware of time, and I do really want to get to these discussion groups, if that's all right with everyone, unless anyone's got anything.
Can I raise my last point very quickly? Well, obviously you guys are doing fantastic work approaching industry bodies, but I was just wondering to what extent you're speaking to regulators, because I suppose we were discussing before about, I don't know what the term was, medical, or the fact for contact lenses and difference between cosmetic contact lenses, etc. But I don't know to the extent that like the packaging falls into certain, how packaging is regulated, because I don't know if it falls under more general regulation as to what medical products are sold as, or is there specific regulation that governs contact lenses, their production?
So the law, just so you know, there's an EU directive called 9342C, which governs the way that contact lenses should be sold and regulated, and the warnings that should be provided and the safety information that should go with them. That's reflected in UK law under the Consumer Protection Act of, I think, 2012. I can't remember exactly, but anyway. And one of the things that I've been trying to do for a long time, many years actually since this all started, is talk to the MHRA about why the stuff in the EU directive is not being enforced in the UK. And we've got two colleagues from the MHRA here. I don't want to put you guys on the spot because I know they're both new to the organisation, but I have to say, and I'm going to put this on record, all of my communications with the MHRA have hit a brick wall, and they're just ignored, deflected, ignored. The last communication I had with them was something like 2017, where they said that they were doing some research and they would come back to me, and since then, follow up, ignore. And I'm not at all putting it in your job, because I know that you're both new and I've never met you before, and I hope that means that things might change. But I've got to say, the MHRA have been absolutely awful in this context, and there's a lot more that the MHRA could be doing to help shooting this along from a regulatory perspective. So, and I hope you'll forgive me for sort of putting you guys on the spot, but it's important in this room because there are patients in this room, and we're all feeling really passionately that things need to change. So this is the right forum for us to say this stuff as well. So firstly,
it's not my fault. No, in all seriousness, I know this is something that has been going on for a long time. And the conversation I had with my boss before I came was that she can't believe herself that nothing more has been done in the period of time that she's been engaging since the last time she engaged with you. So I think we can put our hands up and say that perhaps the amount of action that you wanted to have obviously hasn't happened. The engagement with you obviously hasn't been ideal, as you said. So, but another thing that I will say is that you've mentioned the directives, and we have got new regulations which are coming in next year, and the difference is that these are now regulations rather than directives, which means that because it's a regulation, it has to be applied. It just has to be applied into the law. It directly goes into law. So there will be new things that are covered, as we've already mentioned, like the different types of cosmetic, contact lenses and other cosmetic products. So we do expect there to be quite significant changes with how a lot of different medical devices are regulated with the new regulations rather than directives. Because when you have directives, well, the different member states can kind of say, oh, this is what I think it means, and we'll put it like that into our law.
It has to meet the conditions of the directive.
It does, but it's it's the individual member states' interpretation of the directive rather than you have to put it into law what the regulation says. So regulations are directly applicable, whereas directives can be an interpretation into your own local law. But it's not like that with the regulation. So I know people quite often go, oh yeah, regulations, does it actually do anything? No one does anything. And I can understand why you feel that way.
I mean, I'm sure there'd be a group of us, not just me, but a group of us that might want to be keen to go and talk to the MHRA about some of this stuff and see if we can.
So
we would be happy to see a group of you at the MHRA to have a roundtable stakeholder discussion. That would be absolutely
awesome. Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
no AK images are reporting their cases to the MHRA. They're not telling the MHRA what happened, and then the MHRA are not doing anything to investigate.
For example, like the FDA in America, if people get peroxide solution, contact